Pay attention to this. September 18th, 2024. Early autumn in Charlotte, North Carolina. What you're about to see is a delivery driver doing her job, accepting an act of kindness from a lonely, elderly woman. It would be the last decision she ever made. The footage shows a typical suburban street. Mid-morning, the beginning of fall. A delivery driver approaches a house. An elderly woman answers the door. They exchange words. Then, the elderly woman gestures inside, clearly inviting the driver in. The driver hesitates, then accepts, and follows the woman through the doorway. The door closes behind them. That delivery driver was Sarah Whitmore, 31, who worked for a major package delivery service. The elderly woman was Dorothy Langford, 70, and Sarah would never walk out of that house alive. When Sarah didn't return home that evening, her roommate assumed she'd picked up extra shifts. Sarah often worked late, covering routes for other drivers. But when Sarah didn't come home the next day, didn't answer calls or texts, her roommate contacted Sarah's supervisor. The supervisor checked Sarah's delivery device, which tracked every package scanned and every delivery confirmed. Sarah's last confirmed delivery was at 10:47 a.m. on September 18th. The address, 2847 Maple Drive, Dorothy Langford's residence. Every delivery after that remained unconfirmed. Sarah's van was found 3 blocks away, parked on a side street, locked, with packages still inside. Police went to Dorothy Langford's house on September 20th. Dorothy answered the door, seemed confused about why police were there. When they asked about a delivery driver visiting 2 days prior, Dorothy said yes. A young woman had delivered a package. Dorothy had invited her in for coffee as a thank you. The driver had accepted, stayed for about 15 minutes, then left. Officers asked if they could search the house. Dorothy said, of course, she had nothing to hide. They found Sarah's body in a storage closet off the basement, wrapped in plastic sheeting. Dorothy Langford was arrested immediately. During interrogation, she showed no emotion, no remorse. She admitted to everything. She'd put drops of antifreeze in Sarah's coffee. Ethylene glycol, sweet-tasting, odorless, and in sufficient quantities, lethal. Sarah had drunk the coffee, chatted politely with Dorothy for several minutes, then began feeling ill. Dorothy had offered to let her lie down. Sarah had followed Dorothy to what she thought was a guest room. By the time Sarah realized something was seriously wrong, she was too weak to fight back, too disoriented to call for help. Dorothy had watched her die over the course of several hours, then wrapped the body and hidden it in the storage closet. Dorothy then took Sarah's keys from her bag, drove Sarah's van 3 blocks away, and parked it on a side street where it wouldn't draw attention to her house. She locked it and walked back home. The entire process took less than 20 minutes. Dorothy knew that a delivery van parked in front of her house for days would raise questions. Moving it bought her time. When detectives asked why she'd killed Sarah, Dorothy's answer was chilling. She killed my grandson. She deserved to die, too. The connection between Dorothy Langford and Sarah Whitmore wasn't immediately obvious. They lived in different parts of Charlotte. They had no mutual friends, no shared workplaces, no apparent intersection in their lives. But investigators dug deeper, and they found the link. 3 years earlier, Sarah had briefly dated a man named Connor Langford, Dorothy's grandson. The relationship had lasted less than 2 months. Sarah had never met Connor's family. She'd never been to his grandmother's house, never even knew Dorothy existed. But Dorothy had known about Sarah, and Dorothy had been waiting. Connor Langford died by suicide in October 2021. He was 28 years old, suffered from bipolar disorder and chronic depression. He'd been in and out of treatment for years, had multiple hospitalizations, struggled to maintain relationships or steady employment. His family knew he was fragile. They knew he needed support. But they also knew Connor was an adult who made his own choices, and sometimes those choices pushed people away. In August 2021, Connor met Sarah through a dating app. They went out a few times. Sarah found Connor charming at first, funny, attentive. But within weeks, the relationship became overwhelming. Connor texted constantly, wanted to see Sarah every day, got upset when she didn't respond immediately, made comments about their future together after only a few dates. Sarah recognized the red flags. She tried to end things gently, but Connor didn't accept it. He kept calling, kept showing up at places he knew she'd be, kept insisting they were meant to be together. So, Sarah did what many people do when a relationship becomes uncomfortable and the other person won't take no for an answer. She blocked Connor on all platforms, phone, social media, everything. Complete cutoff. For Sarah, it was self-preservation. For Connor, it was the final rejection he couldn't process. Connor spiraled quickly after Sarah blocked him. Friends said he became obsessed with the relationship, convinced himself that Sarah was the one person who could fix him, that without her, he had no future. His family tried to help. His mother urged him to go back to therapy. Dorothy, his grandmother and the person Connor was closest to in the world, told him there would be other relationships, other chances at happiness. But Connor didn't believe it. On October 12, 2021, he wrote a note blaming Sarah for his decision, saying she'd abandoned him when he needed her most. Then he overdosed on medication he'd been stockpiling. Dorothy found the note. The police saw it during their investigation but didn't pursue it. Connor's death was ruled a suicide. His note, the product of a troubled mind looking for someone to blame. Sarah was never contacted, never knew Connor had died, never saw the note. But Dorothy kept that note, and she let it fuel something dark inside her. Dorothy Langford had raised Connor after his parents died in a car accident when he was 9. She'd been his guardian, his parent figure, his whole world. And Connor had been hers, her only grandchild, the center of her life. When Connor died, Dorothy didn't just grieve, she became consumed by rage toward Sarah, the woman Connor had blamed in his final words. Dorothy convinced herself that Sarah was responsible, that if Sarah had just given Connor another chance, just been kinder, just understood how much Connor needed her, he'd still be alive. It didn't matter that Connor's mental illness had predated Sarah. It didn't matter that his suicide was the result of years of untreated trauma and chemical imbalances. Dorothy needed someone to blame, and Connor had given her a target. For nearly 3 years, Dorothy carried that rage. She learned everything she could about Sarah, where she worked, where she lived, her routines. She discovered Sarah had taken a job as a delivery driver, and Dorothy noticed that Sarah's route occasionally brought her through Dorothy's neighborhood. So Dorothy started ordering packages, small items, frequent deliveries, always hoping Sarah would be the one to bring them. And eventually, she was. The residential security camera that captured Sarah entering Dorothy's house on that early autumn day became the key piece of evidence. Prosecutors used the footage to show that Sarah had no reason to suspect danger, had accepted what appeared to be a kind gesture from a grateful customer, had walked into that house willingly, with no idea she'd been lured there by someone planning her murder. Security cameras from neighboring properties showed Dorothy had been tracking Sarah's deliveries for weeks leading up to September 18th. Dorothy had been watching, waiting. When Sarah appeared on the street that morning, Dorothy had been ready. She'd prepared the poisoned coffee in advance. She'd cleared the storage closet. She'd planned every detail, including how she'd dispose of Sarah's van to avoid suspicion. During Dorothy's trial, which began in January 2025, the prosecution presented a case of premeditated murder driven by misplaced blame and a grief that had twisted into something monstrous. They showed the security footage, presented Dorothy's internet search history full of queries about Sarah's work schedule and antifreeze poisoning, and played recordings of Dorothy's confession where she showed no remorse. The defense tried to argue diminished capacity due to age and grief. They painted Dorothy as a heartbroken grandmother who'd never recovered from losing the child she'd raised. They suggested she'd had a psychotic break, that she hadn't fully understood her actions. But prosecutors presented evidence of extensive planning. Dorothy had been ordering packages, specifically to increase the chances Sarah would deliver to her address. She'd researched how much antifreeze would be lethal. She'd practiced her invitation, rehearsed how she'd appear friendly and harmless. and she'd known to move Sarah's van away from her house to avoid detection. This wasn't a moment of madness. This was calculated revenge. The jury convicted Dorothy Langford of first-degree murder on February 19, 2025. At sentencing, the judge handed down life without parole, noting that Dorothy had abused a position of apparent vulnerability, a friendly elderly woman inviting someone in for coffee, to commit a cold-blooded killing. Sarah Whitmore's family was devastated not just by her death, but by the senselessness of it. Sarah had done what countless people do when a relationship becomes uncomfortable. She'd established boundaries and protected herself. The relationship with Connor had been brief, insignificant in the context of Sarah's life. She'd moved on, built a career, had other relationships, was planning her future. She'd never known Connor died, never knew his grandmother blamed her, never had any reason to fear the elderly woman who invited her in for coffee that September morning. At Dorothy's sentencing hearing, Sarah's mother gave a victim impact statement that brought the courtroom to silence. "My daughter died because she went on a few dates with someone who couldn't handle rejection. She died because his grandmother decided Sarah was responsible for his choices. Sarah didn't even remember his last name. That's how little impact he'd had on her life. And she died for it." Dorothy, given the opportunity to speak, offered no apology. Connor loved her. She threw him away. Someone had to make her pay. The case raised disturbing questions about the dangers delivery drivers face daily. Sarah had entered thousands of homes during her career, almost always without incident. But she'd had no way to know that one seemingly harmless invitation would be fatal. Delivery companies across the country began revising safety protocols. Some implemented systems where drivers could signal distress if they entered a residence. Others established strict policies against accepting invitations into customers' homes. But the reality is that delivery drivers operate in a space between trust and vulnerability. They approach strangers' homes dozens of times a day. Most interactions are routine. Occasionally, customers offer water on hot days, try to engage in friendly conversation, or express gratitude for the service. How can a driver distinguish between genuine kindness from something sinister? Sarah couldn't. She'd made a choice to be polite, to accept what seemed like a sweet gesture from a woman who appeared harmless. And it killed her. Security footage from the neighborhood over the preceding weeks showed Dorothy's pattern of watching for Sarah, tracking her movements, waiting for the right moment. On 3 previous occasions, late summer, Sarah had delivered to Dorothy's address. Each time, Dorothy had come to the door but hadn't extended an invitation. She'd been waiting for a day when Sarah seemed less rushed, more likely to accept. September 18th was that day. Sarah's route had been light that morning. When Dorothy invited her in, Sarah had the time to say yes. Connor Langford's suicide note, the one that had started Dorothy's obsession, was entered into evidence during the trial. In it, Connor blamed Sarah for his pain, said she'd abandoned him when he needed her most, claimed she'd destroyed his hope for the future. Mental health experts testified that Connor's note was typical of someone in severe emotional distress looking to externalize responsibility for internal pain. Sarah wasn't responsible for Connor's death. Connor's untreated mental illness, his history of trauma, his brain chemistry, those factors had been present long before he met Sarah. But Connor had needed to blame someone, and Sarah was convenient. And Dorothy had taken that blame and run with it, turning her grandson's misplaced anger into her own mission of vengeance. The prosecutor asked during closing arguments, "How many brief relationships do we all have that end because we're not compatible? How many people do we date for a few weeks before realizing it's not working and moving on? Do any of us deserve to die because someone we briefly dated couldn't handle rejection?" The jury's answer was clear. No. Sarah Whitmore had done nothing wrong. She'd protected herself from an intense, overwhelming relationship. She'd set boundaries, and she'd died because someone decided those boundaries were unforgivable. Dorothy Langford is incarcerated at a women's correctional facility. At 70 years old, life without parole means she'll likely die in prison. She's filed no appeals. In letters she's written to family members, she maintains that she did what needed to be done, that Connor's death required an answer, that Sarah got what she deserved. The letters show no remorse, no recognition that her actions were wrong, just a grandmother's twisted love for a grandson who's been dead for nearly 4 years, and a conviction that revenge was justified. Sarah Whitmore's family established a foundation in her name focused on safety for gig economy workers, delivery drivers, rideshare drivers, anyone whose job requires them to enter strangers' spaces. They push for better safety protocols, panic button systems, and education about recognizing danger signs. The delivery company Sarah worked for implemented new policies after her death. Drivers are now instructed never to enter a customer's residence. Water or coffee offered at the door is acceptable. Crossing the threshold is not. The policy is absolute, but enforcement is difficult. Drivers who feel pressured by friendly customers, who want to be polite, who've been conditioned to see elderly people as harmless, they still sometimes say yes to invitations. Training materials now include Sarah's case as a cautionary example. The house where Sarah died was sold by Dorothy's family. The new owners didn't learn about the murder until after closing. They've since moved out, unable to live in a space where someone was poisoned and left to die in a storage closet. Connor Langford is buried in a cemetery outside Charlotte. His grave marker makes no mention of suicide, just lists his birth and death dates. Dorothy used to visit every week before her arrest. She'd talk to Connor, tell him about her plans for Sarah, promise him that justice was coming. After Dorothy's conviction, Connor's grave went unvisited for months. Eventually, distant relatives started maintaining it. They leave flowers occasionally, but they don't talk about Connor much. His death was tragic. What his grandmother did in his name was worse. Sarah Whitmore would be 33 now. Her family says she'd probably have moved on from delivery work, was planning to go back to school, wanted to do something in social work or counseling. She'd been saving money, making plans, building toward a future. That future ended in Dorothy Langford's living room on an autumn morning over a cup of poisoned coffee, because Sarah had briefly dated someone 3 years earlier and protected herself when that relationship became uncomfortable. At Sarah's memorial service, her mother said something that stayed with everyone who attended. Sarah died doing her job. She died being polite. She died because someone convinced themselves that a 2-month relationship from years ago deserved a death sentence. And she died never knowing any of this was coming. The cruelty of that last part, that Sarah had no idea Dorothy existed, no idea Connor had died, no idea she'd been blamed or that someone was planning to kill her, haunts everyone who knew her. She'd walked into that house thinking she was sharing coffee with a kind woman. She'd died not understanding why. If someone makes you uncomfortable in a relationship, you have the right to leave. You have the right to block them, to protect yourself, to say no. You are not responsible for how they handle rejection. And if you're a delivery driver, trust your instincts. Politeness is not worth your life. Subscribe for true crime stories that examine how normal situations become deadly. Click on one of the videos on your screen right now for more shocking crime cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And remember, not all danger announces itself. Sometimes it looks like kindness.